So now even Phil Gramm is lying about tariffs. This is freaking, dude, remember Phil Gramm, the guy who authored to get rid of the Glass-Steagall Banking Act. And was it Gramm, Leach, and Bliley? I think there's something else. But anyway, I used to have a Phil Gramm for President sticker on my car. Like, I think 1996, before he dropped out. Then I supported Harry Brown. Was it 2000? I think it was 2000. I can't remember. It was 2000. Yeah, because I did. I went from, it was 2000. I went from Phil Gramm to Steve Forbes, and then ultimately George Bush won. Anyway, he wrote this article in the Wall Street Journal, an opinion piece about how Republicans are going to get killed because of tariffs. They're to scare basically all the Republican Party and say, oh my goodness, you're going to lose your seats and whatnot. Here's a history of tariffs, blah, 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 blah. And it's just a freaking bold-faced lie. He's just lying. I cannot believe it. I'm sitting there thinking, and of course the people in the Wall Street Journal love Phil Gramm because they hate tariffs, because they hate Trump. And as such, all the commentators are like, oh, yeah, you don't like reality. So this isn't reality. The facts are, Phil Gramm just neglected the Dingley Tariff of 1897. One of the largest tariffs we've ever seen. I think number 2, maybe number 3 or number 2, something like that. One of the biggest tariffs we've ever seen was in 1897, the Dingley Tariff Act. And what happened after that, as I've said a million times, the U.S. took over the UK in industrial output, manufacturing. We owned the world in manufacturing by that point. UK went basically because they stay committed to free trade, and they just went south, and they have never recovered. It's crazy. And Phil Gramm just completely pretends like that did not exist. And there was elections in 1898. Oh, the Republicans held tight in 1898 too. He just completely ignored that in his article. He said all these tariffs led to Republican losses, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, first of all, we don't know the tariffs did. I mean, that's just like idiotic saying, I don't know, friggin' the price of gas leads to Republican losses or Republican gas. This whole thing. The AFC winner wins the Super Bowl, the Republicans win or something like that. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And then the guy from George Mason, I think his name's Dan Boudreaux or something like that. I'm just embarrassed for these guys because it's one thing. I hate liars. I hate it. Don't flippin' lie. That drives me insane. And I tell you, man, it just is wrong. And then on top of that, Phil Gramm is trying to say, oh my goodness, after the Civil War, the tariff rates went down by 30% and industrial output exploded. And I was like, so tariffs, you're implying that tariffs were high and then they went lower after the Civil War. Is that what you're implying, Phil Gramm? That's exactly not what happened. We averaged about 50% on dutiable products after the Civil War of tariffs. Now, you can make a claim that some products were neglected to be tariffed as others were not. Go ahead and make that claim. But we average around a 50% dutiable. Dutiable just means the products that are subject to duties, all right? And so those products, which were vast, 50% was the average tariff rate. Can you believe that? Well, you heard it here first, because a lot of people don't know that. Somehow Phil Gramm wants to say industrialization took off because rates were declining, huh? That doesn't make, sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. They went up and down, but they always stayed well above 40% by and large, up to an average 50%. The McKinley tariff kicked in 1890. We certainly didn't have a huge inflationary growth economy, or I hate to say growth, a huge inflationary economy after that. Oh, but by the way, guess what? We were already in a recession before the tariffs kicked in. Why? Because Europe was going through a mass recession. Why were they going through a mass recession? Actually, depression. It was because tariffs. The idea that Phil Gramm doesn't know this, it just embarrasses me. All right, so then McKinley kicked in. Republicans lost Congress. And they did reduce tariffs. Grover Cleveland, not by much. In fact, he didn't reduce it enough where Grover Cleveland even wanted to sign the bill. He didn't even sign the bill of the Democrats of reducing tariffs. Not very much, by the way, but they did reduce tariffs from an average of about 50% to 40%. But Cleveland said, I'm not going to sign this bill. This bill doesn't reduce tariffs enough. All right, so then we had the Dingley Tariff of 1897, and the Republicans did not relinquish control of Washington, D.C. until 1912. And partly because of Theodore Roosevelt This stupid Bull Moose party, because everyone thinks this guy's all that in a bag of chips. That guy's very suspect without question. And so we split the Republican Party, and as such, Woodrow Wilson took over. And many of our grandparents, if not great-grandparents probably, suffered the consequence for World War I, either here, because there are states, U.S. Entrance into World War I, but overseas as well, because many of us were still in the old country, and we still had fights and battles and stuff and Psalms and all this that just devastated people. That should never have happened. And then, of course, Wilson's entrance into it made America suffer even more, simply because of Theodore Roosevelt reneging from staying with the Republican Party. I'm not going to blame World War I on Theodore Roosevelt. No, what I'm saying is because he allowed Woodrow Wilson to take over, that changed the course of history and probably changed how many people died in World War I because of that. It might have been settled differently. I don't know. But certainly American entrance in the war might have been suspect. Anyway, part two of this is Phil Gramm wants to say, hey, when tariffs are applied, the Republicans lose. I'm like, who is against tariffs there, Phil Gramm? Oh, it's a Democratic Party, all right? The insurrectionists, if you will. So whenever, at some point, the Republican Party loses power, you think the people... You think that people align themselves with the Democratic Party, who is literally segregationist back then because of the Republican stance on tariffs? Come on, dude. Oh, my goodness. The Democrats were anti-tariffs, the Republicans were pro-tariffs, and, of course, tariffs are what caused the Civil War, by the way. The North wanted to invade the South to make sure they could enforce tariffs on the South. That's exactly what happened. How dare you, Josh? It's just fact. And so anyway, the issue is Republicans love tariffs. The South paid most of the tariffs to basically support the industrialists in the North. And you can say that's wrong or right in terms of the way it should not have been, but it is. It's exactly what happened. And the South said enough of this. And so at some point, the South said, we're going to get our act together. We're going to join the Democratic Party, and then we're going to get enough Midwesterners and whatnot to align with us. And as such, we'll take back the reins of power. And they did. And then they lost again. And again, the Republican Party maintained power from 1896, I think it was 1896, because didn't McKinley win in 1896? So McKinley lost his own seat in 1892, and I think he won the presidency in 1896. I think he did. I think McKinley won the president, or 1898. I think it was 1896, actually. And then the Dingley Tariff Act came in 1897, and the American took over the world. That's just a fact. Then, of course, he gives very short shift to the Fordney tariff of 1922. He says, "Oh, it didn't do what it's supposed to do." What? It certainly didn't stop a roaring U.S. economy, Phil Gramm. He goes, "Oh, but it's embarrassing. I cannot stand the Wall Street Journal anymore. Their big corporation love. It's at some point, I'll never forget Owen Benjamin saying this too. He said this, he goes, dude, I used to be like a libertarian until I got banned off all the private platforms. All of them. He couldn't even rent, his wife couldn't even rent their house to Airbnb, on Airbnb, even though they had a 5-star rating and dozens of ratings. He could not rent his house on Airbnb. He was kicked off, all these other things, lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was insane, all because he challenged the trans narrative before it's cool to challenge the trans narrative. All right, so what you fast forward, let's see, COVID. You fast forward a number. So when Owen Benjamin was kicked off all these platforms, he said the only place he could perform, because he's a comedian, and the only place he's allowed to accept money, because PayPal didn't, Venmo didn't, was the post office to mail him a check, or libraries. That's it. The government entities. That's the only place Owen Benjamin could actually make a living, because they can't discriminate, because he is a taxpayer. And I tell you, dude, it's 100%, man. After COVID, for me, I was like, oh, corporations act like they're all that in a bag of chips until they want something from you. And if you don't appease them, they'll ban you everywhere. I said, I get it. So at the end of the day, if big corporations are big government, in a lot of ways, I'm going to take big government, because I don't trust these corporations at all. All right. God bless. Love your thoughts. We'll see you.